Before we get to the content, it's very important that you guys know that I am giving away multiple copies of NBA 2K22. All you have to do to enter is follow me on Twitter or Instagram. I'm going to pick multiple followers on both platforms, so if you follow both platforms, you have the best chances of winning to win a copy of NBA 2K22. And if you don't want NBA 2K22, then I could just give you the money for it instead. Now that we got all that out of the way, cue the intro.
And say, oh, I want to return to the Lakers, but you wanted to play games. And now you are the disaster of your own game plan. You don't know what you're going to do. You probably lost about $60 million because you didn't sign with the Lakers. Now you probably going to have to sign a one-year deal because I don't think the Lakers are going to bring them back because they're stacked now. They have no room for you. They're already at the cap space, so you're going to have to find another home and try to start your whole career. He wanted to be a starter in this league. Now, wherever he goes now, he's going to go back to being a backup. I just hope it doesn't turn out like an IT situation where you pass up all this money and then you can never recoup it.
Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? If there's one person that I've been waiting to make a video on, it has to be Dennis Schroder because this man is very near and dear to my heart. So smack that like button for the YouTube algorithm and let's get it. Because Dennis Schroder is one of the most polarizing players in all of the entire NBA. A player that personally, as a Los Angeles Lakers fan, I was in a state of elation when I found out that my Los Angeles Lakers traded the likes of Danny Green to bring along Dennis Schroder. And I felt like the entire deal was an absolute home run. I mean, at the very worst case, you get out of Danny Green's contract, you get yourself a very good and reliable scorer that could play off of LeBron James and Anthony Davis. And, well, from the very beginning, things seemed to be very troublesome for Dennis Schroder. Coming in the very beginning, he came out and said that he intends to start at point guard for the Los Angeles Lakers after a career where he was primarily perceived to be an extremely high-end sixth man. And to quote him directly, according to this ESPN article, he said, "I did this off the bench stuff already in 2 years with OKC. And I think I'm going to try to move forward. And I think with Anthony Davis and LeBron, I can be helpful as a starter in the point guard position." And he further clarified saying that I think my agent talked to the organization before they was trading me. Bear in mind, coming into this season, Dennis Schroder finished second place in Sixth Man of the Year award voting behind his teammate Montrezl Harrell. So the Los Angeles Lakers were considered to be extremely deep, and while unfortunately it didn't really work out for him. When he was asked in the beginning of the year if he viewed the Los Angeles Lakers as a long-term fit, he said, "At the end of the day, I will just try to focus on this year, but if it's a fair deal and everything goes right, then of course I think long-term. But I just try to lock in now for this season, take it day by day, and let's see if we can come to an agreement on that." Now, an extremely common theme that we discuss on this YouTube channel is whenever a player happens to unfortunately mismanage their career and it results in costing them millions and millions of dollars. Sometimes this could be intentional, and sometimes this could be a player betting on themselves, or this could be a player getting injured at the absolute worst time possible. And in this instance, a very popular case of unfortunate career mismanagement that you really can't point the blame finger at the man for doing this is the case of Isaiah Thomas, which shout out to Isaiah Thomas. He just went off for 81 points. Isaiah Thomas was an absolutely gifted player for the Boston Celtics, an absolute unicorn at the point guard position that despite being undersized at 5'9", the man was able to finish in the top 5 of MVP voting in his final season with the Boston Celtics. And just as God can give, man, he can taketh away, because in a span of a few weeks, Isaiah Thomas's entire world was turned upside down, starting with the tragic death of his sister in a car accident prior to the Boston Celtics 2017 playoff run. In combination with a hip injury, Isaiah Thomas played through that hip injury and had multiple courageous efforts leading the Boston Celtics all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals, where he would be defeated by LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers. The Boston Celtics opted to sell high on Isaiah Thomas in his contract year at the peak of his value, trading him to the Cleveland Cavaliers for Kyrie Irving, playing, and instead of opting to sit out for the year due to a bad hip, I understand that he may have felt pressure to play due to being LeBron James's teammate and Kyrie Irving's replacement, but Isaiah Thomas opted to play that season, and he didn't really succeed in Cleveland's offense, and eventually after 15 games, the Cleveland Cavaliers would trade him to the Los Angeles Lakers, where he would average 15.6 points per game off of 33% from 3 and 38% from the field, which was a significant difference from the numbers he was putting up in the 2016 to 2017 season, which was 46% from the field and 38% from 3, and almost double the amount of points and literally double the player efficiency rating. He was perceived to be a offensive liability at that point because his OBPM with the Boston Celtics was a 7.8, but with the Cleveland Cavaliers it was a negative 1.2, and on the Lakers it was a negative 0.7, and he was a significantly higher defensive liability because he didn't have Brad Stevens game planning around him properly, which resulted in him getting exposed on the defensive end. All of these weaknesses festered and resulted in Isaiah Thomas not being able to cash in on his contract year, and instead of signing a multi-million-dollar deal or a contract extension with the Boston Celtics, Isaiah Thomas would have to settle for multiple veteran minimums and becoming a NBA journeyman from that point on. Another similar situation that was also tragic is the story of Demarcus Cousins, a player that was perceived as a superstar for the Sacramento Kings and briefly for the New Orleans Pelicans. During the 2016 to 2017 season, the New Orleans Pelicans were absolutely desperate to prove to Anthony Davis that they wanted to build a contender around him, so they traded for Demarcus Cousins, and it was actually a fairly promising and interesting experiment between the two, but it was unfortunately very short-lived, as Demarcus Cousins only played 65 games in New Orleans before tearing his Achilles. Following tearing his Achilles, that very offseason, he decided to sign with the Golden State Warriors, where he would attempt to rehab his Achilles, but when he would play for the Golden State Warriors, he definitely lost a little bit of a step and wasn't the dominant player that he once was. What made things even worse is the year after, he signed with the Los Angeles Lakers and tore his ACL while playing pickup ball, and at that point and on, he became a journeyman that unfortunately is kind of a shell of his former self, but on occasion, he could provide games where he turns back the clock and kind of look like his former dominant self. Dennis Schroder's situation is unfortunately not like any of these situations, as Dennis Schroder is a player that really needed to cash in, as this is his age 27 season, which probably means this is going to be his biggest payday of his entire career. Typically, your age 27 season is when you get your biggest payday, and after being traded to a Los Angeles Lakers team that features the likes of LeBron James and Anthony Davis, it makes a lot of sense why Dennis Schroder wanted to start for the Los Angeles Lakers. Starters do get infinitely more money than a sixth man. If you look at the case of Montrezl Harrell, he was literally offered a 2-year, $19 million deal after winning Sixth Man of the Year, so it makes sense why he wanted to start. Well, upon acquiring Dennis Schroder, the Los Angeles Lakers actually offered him a 2-year, $33.4 million contract extension before the season, and he declined. The main reason being that even if the Lakers wanted to offer him more than that, a detail in the collective bargaining agreement prevented them from doing so, at least at that particular moment. The reason being that if a player just gets traded to a brand new team, an extension is typically very limited as to what a player can receive on their new team, and that new extension could literally only be 5% higher than the player's previous contract. Well, thankfully, Dennis Schroder's gamble paid off, because when February came, the Los Angeles Lakers offered him a 4-year, $84 million maximum extension. And at this point, Dennis Schroder had a ton of leverage, because if Dennis Schroder would leave, the Los Angeles Lakers would still be capped out, and if he does leave, the only option that the Lakers would have would be trading players like Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and Kyle Kuzma, and of course, Montrezl Harrell. And ultimately, that's where Dennis Schroder ended up losing. After a very tough stretch where he saw LeBron James get injured and Anthony Davis get injured, in addition to a very poor playoff run that had Los Angeles Lakers fans making memes about how he belongs in China, Dennis Schroder was set to hit the open market, but he didn't have a ton of momentum. And as free agency opened and targets like Spencer Dinwiddie signed with the Washington Wizards, the Los Angeles Lakers swung a blockbuster trade for Russell Westbrook, and this is where we are now. Dennis Schroder now has very little to absolutely no market and is believed to be in a state of shock about rejecting the Los Angeles Lakers' $84 million offer. That's because the Boston Celtics were recently reported to be interested in Dennis Schroder, but not in the way that Dennis Schroder would hope. According to Mark Murphy of the Boston Herald, Dennis Schroder is searching for a one-year deal. He wants a one-year deal and then wants to get back out there. And what sucks for Dennis Schroder is there's not that many starting point guard jobs at this point. So the Boston Celtics went ahead and pitched Dennis Schroder on the idea of backing up Marcus Smart next season, and he would be only getting paid a one-year $5.9 million contract as opposed to a four-year $84 million contract to play for a championship contender. So as we were making this video, Dennis Schroder accepted the Boston Celtics one-year offer, so I felt like I'd be doing you guys a disservice if I didn't look at this from the Boston Celtics point of view, because if you're the Boston Celtics, it's been a very rough couple of years for you. The only highlights of these past couple of years were probably the Kyrie Irving trade, the drafting of Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, and then obviously Kyrie Irving ended up leaving, so that wasn't really a high point. But this was the first major move that Brad Stevens made, and signing a player like Dennis Schroder that was about to get a four-year $84 million contract from the Los Angeles Lakers to a one-year $5.9 million deal is an absolute steal. And I know Dennis Schroder is being memed like crazy, but it is a remarkable deal for the Boston Celtics, and they get a fat A+ for this. Give Dennis Schroder an F, but to be honest, it's a little bit more complicated than that because I would just be playing Captain Hindsight to a very difficult situation. So what exactly can we learn from this? I'm not exactly sure. As someone that's very fascinated in the business of the NBA and how these players make money, and if you properly are betting on yourself, Dennis Schroder just simply took a risk that was a very calculated risk, because typically players on LeBron James's teams tend to get paid. If you look at Matthew Dellavedova or Timofey Mozgov, typically players that leave LeBron James-led teams happen to get paid. And in Dennis Schroder's case, that just didn't happen, and it's unfortunate. The man decided to really bet on himself and rejected a four-year $84 million deal. I guess he wanted $100 million. It's really hard to say, but now he's gonna have to bet on himself for one more year, assuming that he gets the chance and accepts the Celtics offer. So let me know in the comment section down below, would you have done anything differently? Would you have accepted the four-year $84 million contract? Do you think Dennis Schroder is going to regret this decision for years to come? Let me know in the comment section down below what you guys think. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.